The 3 of them are on the State Department's list of states that sponsor terrorists, and the 3 of them are also developing weapons of mass destruction. As Condoleezza Rice said the next day, is there any doubt that al-Qaeda types, had they access to such weapons, biological, chemical, that they wouldn't have used them? Of course they would. This poses a grave threat to the West, but I agree with Al. The 3 otherwise, with respect to how we now respond, are not in the same situation.
When you look at the administration, this was a big defeat for Secretary of State Powell, because this is not his style.
Well, he's outnumbered and wrong. Maybe.
Well, I think he's right. He's outnumbered and right. And today he is giving the assurances not to the North Koreans, Kate, but to the South Koreans, who are scared to death by this.
2 points. First, it does look like Secretary Powell's tenure as Secretary of State will have gone roughly from September 11th, because that was the first time they actually took him out of the room and let him be the Secretary, and it ended the State of the Union. Secondly, Kate, I think the point you make argues against the kind of Bush approach. Yes, if al-Qaeda had the weapons of Iraq, Iran, or North Korea, they would have used them. And in fact, neither Iraq, nor Iran, nor North Korea shared them with them. I mean, the very fact that al-Qaeda had no access to any of the weapons of those 3 countries argues against the notion that it's a commonality of purpose.
It seems to me the key thing that, Bob, you must be arguing with the President about, and you too, Barney, the President says time is not on our side. They didn't have them September 11th. There's no guarantee they won't, and he will not wait for events to overtake us. Bob is apparently willing to let...
Well, what are you doing with North Korea? Are we going to invade North Korea? I mean,
apparently, no. I would venture to say, no, we're not.
Well, then time will never be on our side. That's our point. And by the way, somebody said, Al said, well, he had a good point about Iraq. It was different with Iran and North Korea. Part of the problem is that he treated them as if they were all the same, and they're not the same, and that's just not coherent thinking.
And I don't know if Syria and Libya should sue to get on the list. I mean, if you're talking about this,
you're very much up on military affairs. When are we going to get? We really shot our wad in Afghanistan on armaments. When are we going to? He says time is not on our side, but we need time to rebuild that arsenal.
Well, when it comes to Iraq, I would be optimistic. Our bombs are a lot smarter than they were in 1991, and now we'll see whether or not Saddam Hussein's smarter.
A lot less.
We have 1 million fewer men under arms,
and fewer smart bombs,
and not reliable allies like the Northern Alliance. You can't capture Iraq with the Kurds the way you could capture...
Because we heard a lot of this before Afghanistan, too, I will remind you.
No, you didn't hear it from me, Kate. And Afghanistan and Iraq are very different, and trying to ignore that, I think
they're different, but there are an awful lot
Where are we going to base American forces if we go in Iraq?
I don't know.
Last word. Marty Franklin going to be back with who's going to pay for the Bush budget, and later, Congress goes to court against the president. Red ink ahead of the federal budget.
It costs a lot to fight this war. My budget includes the largest increase in defense spending in 2 decades. My budget nearly doubles funding for a sustained strategy of homeland security. To achieve these great national objectives, to win the war, protect the homeland, and revitalize our economy, our budget will run a deficit that will be small and short-term so long as Congress restrains spending and acts in a fiscally responsible manner.
Now, what is the argument against restraining domestic spending to offset the war, the cost of the war against terrorism?
Mark, that there is no shared sacrifice. If there's a war, the first priority must be the men and women in uniform, and certainly that is President Bush's first priority. History, Vietnam in particular, has shown us you can't have guns and butter over a sustained period of time. And what this administration proposes are lots of guns, lots of tax cuts for the very wealthy, and to cut back on job training and health care. In other words, they want to have guns, caviar, and no margarine. That's the objection.
Bob Novak, somebody said, one of the president's biggest supporters said, it was very Churchillian. It was Churchillian, except there was no sweat, there was no toil, and there was no tears, was there?
Well, I don't know if there's a war either. I've always been questioning that, but I do know that all this business, this is a conservative administration, or it's supposed to be. I think they probably are spending too much on domestic stuff. They're putting all this money into a lot of domestic programs that they shouldn't. But this whole deficit thing is ridiculous. If we have a recovery such as the most conservative and restrained economists predict we're going to have huge surpluses again coming up very soon. We're going to have money to burn, and the point is the tax rates within a year or so. The tax rates are much too high right now, and we need to have tax cuts for everybody, and that is what the president is talking about. And I think that Mitch Daniels laid it out very well, Al, when we had him on Novak, Hunt, and Shields earlier today, in which he said that what we had to do is control. The government had to control some of this domestic spending and some of this pork barrel spending.
Doesn't the president have a veto? Go ahead. I'm sorry, Brian.
Well, I want to come back a year from now, and Bob said that we're going to have these surpluses in a year or so from now. So I want to come back here and watch Bob burn the money. I think we're all going to be very cold if we have to depend on that burning of that money. But I want to answer your question literally. You said, what's the argument about domestic spending? The same argument as military spending. People will die if we don't do it. I'm being quite literally. The medical system of the United States is both excellent and disastrous. It is superb medicine, but it is very unevenly available. The president basically has given up on trying to provide a prescription drug program for older people. His program says you get prescription drug help on Medicare if you make $13,000 or less as an individual, $17,000 a couple. So millions of middle-income Americans retired on $25,000, $30,000 are going to have a problem paying for their drug bills. He's talking about cutting back on Medicaid. We worried about whether if there was an outbreak of anthrax or something else, our public hospital system, our health system would be ready for it. Our health system isn't ready for Friday night in a lot of big cities. Emergency rooms shut down. So the underfunding of medical care, which leads to it being denied to an awful lot of people, frankly, is causing more deaths over time than we lose from terrorism.
Let me go back to your initial question, Mark. Please. One would think it would be a time, given the priorities the President's laid out of defense, both with respect to our military overseas and homeland defense, to say that Washington should get back to basics, stop doing much of what it does, and concentrate on the fundamental responsibility to protect and defend American lives from these kinds of threats. But the White House doesn't want that kind of fight. At the moment, it seems to me, they feel as though they're fighting these two-front wars. They don't want to be fighting a congressional civil war over spending, and so I fear that they're going to let both Republicans and Democrats who want to spend too much money off the hook.
There's $48 billion in defense. It kind of whistled right through. The president promised a top-to-bottom review as candidate, and you look at it, and everything's going to be funded. F-22s, Ospreys, Crusaders, it's all funded. I mean, what happened top to bottom?
They said that they would invest in new technologies, and they were quite critical of some of the Clinton proposals back then. Every major system that Clinton wanted, they want to, in addition to the new technologies. I think there were no decisions made, at least in this budget. And also, Bob, I point out the Republican-run CBO says that we're going to have, exclusive of Social Security, a $700 billion deficit over the next 10 years, and that's before you get into Homeland Security, defense, foreign bill, and tax standards. It's going to be...
That is the green eye shade type of, I don't care whether Republicans, Democrats, or Socialists, that's the green eye shade type
and they're only wrong.
And they're always wrong. The business economists, if you have think there's going to be a 3% growth rate, if you have a 3% growth rate, the money will come rolling in. But, Barney's argument, you lost the election, Barney, and whether you...
And does that mean democracy ends, Bob?
No,
we have a debate. We didn't lose everything, and we have a debate. And saying you lost the election and that precludes debate is silly.
No, but the
president said he was for a prescription drug program during the election.
But it's not your big social...
either. It's not an honest carrying out of what he said.
That's a difference of opinion.
No, he never went out honestly and said to people, oh yeah, I'm going to help you with prescription drugs if you're making $13,000 a year or less. I think he misled people, and we're entitled to call that.
Last word, Marty Frank, next on Capital Gang. Congress and the president eyeball to eyeball in court.
You may not know it, but...
This advice, quote, this is an issue where Democrats ought to talk about right and wrong, greed and responsibility. This is, after all, a story about high-level corporate malfeasance and excessive corporate influence in government, in Congress, to be sure, but increasingly in the Bush administration, end quote. Couldn't have said it better myself.
I haven't seen it, but I wouldn't support that. The last thing we should do is politicize this scandal.
Behind the curve,
this deadly threat. Being unified is more important than ever.
public gives him high marks for being decent and honest. It makes it harder and harder for the Democrats to do this. That president's honesty, in contrast to Tom Daschle's, we're not going to politicize Enron. It's Terry McAuliffe, not freelance. It's Terry McAuliffe, the head of the party, is the one who calls Enron a metaphor for the Bush administration. In North Carolina, Democrats are running Enron ads against Liddy Dole. But it's all the Democrats sort of have. The president leads on top issues. He's